but he's published numerous articles and essays on the First World War. The Empire on the Western Front, published by UBC Press, was his first book. His most recent book, The War Diaries of David Watson, was recently published by WLU Press. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jackson today. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the Canadian Friends of the Canadian War Museum for having me. I'm going to share the screen now to my PowerPoint. Just wait. Perfect. Hopefully you could all see it. Now, what I'm going to be discussing today is a chapter of from my first book, if you could see that, looking at the Battle of Arras, but I'm going to be looking at it from the point of view of the British Empire. How did they raise divisions to fight in the First World War? A lot has been written on Canadian history about how Canada was really good at raising divisions and how the Canadian Corps was seen as the shock troops of the British Empire. Absolutely, but in the Battle of Arras, this had not yet been proven. So Vimy Ridge is just one small section of the larger Battle of Arras. So why did the Canadians do so well, and how did other British divisions fare, and why was that happening, or what was the difference there? What my book really looks at is taking two volunteer, largely divisions that is surrounded by a small cadre of professional soldiers, and how do we prepare men for war, and did Canada do it in a different way than the larger British experience? And that's what the book looks at, but I'll be just looking at one case study as time is quite limited here. So we're just looking at the Battle of Arras, which happened 105 years ago today. Yeah, so I have here Canadians firing on Vimy Ridge. And the quote I have is from a German officer. The war is a struggle between two Welschenschlagens, the Germanic against the Anglo-Saxons. One must win, the other must perish. This Battle of Arras is going to be one of the big epic battles of 1917. All right, so the Battle of Arras doesn't only last for the 4 days that it happens on Vimy Ridge on April 9th. This one goes on for about 7 weeks, and it costs 159,000 British casualties, Canadians included. That is a wastage of about over 4,000 casualties a day. Given the freedom of choice, Haig would not have wanted to launch this Battle of Arras. He was really trying to take the pressure off of the French forces, who had sort of gotten hammered during the Battle of Verdun. There was elements that were near mutinying at this time, and it was a way to put a bit of a release for the French. So that's why this battle is happening. Here we see Canadians digging in on top of Vimy Ridge after recently taking it. All right, so one of the first things I looked at in my research, and where I really looked to, is were the Canadians training at all differently than other British units, or were it under some larger codified way of training? Now, in 1915, 1916, training directorates, training of divisions had not been codified yet. They had not come up with a set piece of this is what a division should be doing, this is how a division should be training, and items like that. And one of the reasons why was when you look at the British Expeditionary Force in 1914, it's taking 6 divisions that are largely used in policing activities and bringing them together. And from there, you're going to take these 6 divisions, and it's going to grow to over 65 divisions on the Western Front. So it's going to grow very, very quickly. There's going to be a mass of volunteers coming in. There's going to be a mass of individuals rising to a rank that they never thought they would be commanding, months ago, coming into this. So there was no real training or codified directorate that was happening. However, during the Battle of the Somme and in the immediate aftermath in 1916, they did start to release official training manuals. And I've gone through the documents, and they go from battalion all the way up to division about what they should be doing, how they should be doing it. And they would be looking at different aspects of it. And so it wasn't a unique manual that the Canadians were using. Though Canadians did have input in it, though they were studying it, they were studying it the same as every other division in the British Expeditionary Force. And one of the things that in the late 1916 training manuals discussed was this idea of a methodical attack. All right. So I'm looking at the Canadian 4th Division today, and I'm going to be looking at the British 62nd Division today. Now, I picked both of these divisions because they largely entered onto the Western Front at the same time, and they had a similar amount of battles that they fought in the 2 years or just over 2 years that they were on the Western Front. Also, it largely came from a volunteer force who were built up the battalions and brigades within these divisions. And they both had the same sort of restrictions, lack of proper training before getting to France. Some battalions in the 4th Division didn't get to England until June and July of 1916, and then they're fighting in the Somme in October of 1916. So a really quick learning curve there for them. When they were training in Canada, they didn't have proper rifles, machine guns. The 62nd Division, very similar, though many of its battalions have been put together in 1915. They didn't have proper guns, lots of them trained with wooden guns. Junior officers that were seen to be capable, soldiers that were seen to be capable, were picked from the 62nd Division and field reinforcements to other British units. The 62nd Division was a holding division, and then in December of 1916, it was decided that they were just going to send it over to the Western Front as well. So getting back to Vimy Ridge, and it's one of the questions that I still haven't found a satisfactory answer for. And I've talked to a lot of experts out in Ontario about this as well, is why was the most junior division given the most challenging feature to attack? There's been no solid answer, but as the map here shows, the Canadian divisions were lined up 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to be looking at the 4th Division, the green rectangle here. They would be attacking Hill 145 and the Pimple, absolutely the most challenging feature on Vimy Ridge. I don't know why the most junior division got this, and I've spent a lot of time and talked to a lot of experts to try to find an answer. So far, I don't have one. So if you guys have a good answer to this, please let me know. So Canadians under the command of Julian Byng in January of 1917 were told that in 4 months, you will be attacking Vimy Ridge. Okay, so they have plenty of time to prepare for this attack using the training manuals that have been published by the British War Office. They were told that it would be a limited offensive, that they would take 4 different colored lines, and once they took that last line, their attack is over. They would consolidate and dig in, as we saw with those individuals digging in with the Vickers machine guns in the previous slide. Under the command of the Canadian 4th Division was David Watson. David Watson was a journalist in Quebec. He was an editor of the Quebec Chronicle, the biggest Anglo newspaper in Quebec. He knew how to play the political game very well. He was friends with Sam Hughes, though he cuts his ties to Sam Hughes as soon as he loses favor. He's good friends with Beaverbrook and all these other guys. So as much as a commander, he's very much a political operator as well. he does fine at Second Battle of Ypres, and then he doesn't really see any fighting. As a brigade commander, he doesn't see any real large combat role. And then largely through his political angles, he gets the 4th Division. He's a competent commander. His GSO-1 Ironside, also very competent, will go on to be the chode for Britain during the first opening months of World War II before he's replaced. So there are very competent career officers within the Canadian Corps. All right, moving on to the next slide. Where the ground of the Somme battlefield appears to suffer from smallpox, Vimy Ridge had a conclusion of the bombardment had confluent smallpox. They absolutely hammered Vimy Ridge for weeks leading into this attack. Starting on March 20th, they absolutely bombarded this hill. Defense in depth was difficult to do at Vimy Ridge because it is a ridge and then it drops off below. So German forces were actually stationed 24 kilometers away. Canadian artillery was heavily reinforced with British artillery. Though this is a Canadian victory, we can't forget it's part of a larger British battle, and that British forces are very much helping Canadians in this attack. All right. So one of the things that comes out of these training manuals that I talked about is SS 143, instructions for training of platoons for offensive actions. So they have training manuals for absolutely everything. It is quite eye-opening how detailed they go into with these. Canadians have the luxury of 4 months of planning for this attack. They go over large-scale models. There is communication through all levels. All the troops know what's going to happen, where they need to go. So if their junior officers get killed, they still have trained on where they need to go, what line they need to stop. There is over 40,000 trench maps that are going to be produced and given out to the Canadian Corps, so that though they might not be as secret if one of these soldiers gets caught with it, there is a very clear process of what's happening. This is one of the large-scale maps of Vimy Ridge that the Canadians are walking over to get an idea of where they're going, where the trench lines are, but more importantly, where are these 4 lines of this limited objective they're looking for. There's also going to be application of, new technology, such as an early version of motors and stuff like this. As well with this preparation, and I am rushing through this a bit because I know my time is limited. There's tunnel excavations, there's 12 subways leading up, intense raiding leading up to the assault. Some of that intense raiding better than others. The Canadian 4th Division fires one off at the beginning of March where they absolutely get hammered, but that's another story. And there are air battles. So when that Vimy Ridge happens, when the assault goes in, Canadians will dominate the air as well. All right. So at April 9th, exactly 5:30 in the morning, artillery pieces start shelling. Sleet and snow is falling, so it makes it harder for the German defenders to see if an actual attack is coming this day. They blew up a series of mines, and the Canadians charge Vimy Ridge. Now, we all know this story, so I'm not going to go into it in detail. Canadians or the Canadian 4th Division has the hardest time, whereas most of the Canadian objectives were taken in the first day. The Canadian 4th Division took 3 days of continuing fighting, suffering over 3,500 casualties to take their objectives. And as one 4th Division officer wrote, corpses accumulated and formed small hails of khaki. Though they did take Vimy Ridge, though they did take Hill 45, though they did take the Pimple, nothing in the First World War is ever straightforward and easy. All these successes are measured in thousands of casualties. All right, so that's a brief overview of how the Canadians prepared for this attack on Vimy Ridge during the Battle of Arras. All right, that said, Germans did not see the capture of Vimy Ridge as a loss. At worst, they saw it as a draw. And there's a fantastic article on a Canadian military history journal that discusses the German optics of this, and I would encourage all of you guys to read it. Germans pulled back to the Aubry-Maricourt line, another defensive structure. They didn't view it as a loss because there was no strategic breakout. There was no more pressure put on them on Vimy Ridge. They were able to hold it and pulled it back. So where it's viewed in Canada as a big victory, Germans at the time did not view it the same way. All right. So as I said, we looked at the victory of Vimy Ridge, what Canadians did, or what the Canadian 4th Division did to prepare for that victory. Now we're going to look at the 62nd Division. As I briefly talked about at the beginning of this presentation, largely raised the volunteers, though it had been around as basically a skeleton since 1915, it actually comes to the Western Front in January of 1917, with everyone having arrived by February of 1917. So one of the quotes that an officer in the 62nd wrote, in view of Sir Douglas Haig's decision to limit the future scope of the Arras offensive, preparatory to switching his efforts to Flanders, so Passchendaele, it may appear strange that a fresh attack should be launched by 3 armies on a frontage of over 14 miles, 22 kilometers for us Canadians. Yeah, whereas Vimy Ridge was planned to the detail, everything, having artillery bombardment, having troops know where to go, having these trench maps, having 4 months of planning. The 62nd would be part of an attack at Bullecourt at the other end of the Arras offensive that was really ad hoc and thrown together, though the amount of men attacking would be on the same scale. The 62nd Battle of Bullecourt that we're looking at is actually known as the Second Battle of Bullecourt. So on at the beginning of April, with the attack on Vimy Ridge, the 62nd Division was brought in late March, March 22nd, to attack, I believe I could get that date wrong, to attack Bullecourt. So they went in to attack. However, the divisions on their flanks were Australian divisions. And 25 minutes into the attack, the Australians let the 62nd Division leadership know that they weren't going to be attacking, that they didn't feel this attack was going to be successful. So a bit after the fact, the 62nd obviously had to pull back to the original lines, and they were mauled pretty hard. And there was a lot of hard feelings against Australians for letting them down. That said, they were told to hang out, holding the line for the next 3 weeks, though they weren't told if another attack would be going in or not. Now, this is the town of Bullecourt after it's been shelled by British forces. And the British did, and the 62nd Division did continue to have patrols. The divisional commander of the 62nd was a career officer, Walter Brathwaite. He was GSO-1 of Hamilton during the Gallipoli disasters. After Gallipoli, he was brought back to Britain. He thought his days of command were over. And I have no sort of evidence for why he got a 62nd Division. We do know that his wife was a close friend of Sir Douglas Haig's wife. Now, I've seen no proof that because of this he got it, but for whatever reason, Sir Douglas Haig says, yeah, you're going to command the 62nd Division, and the 62nd Division is going to go to the Western Front. All right. Walter Brathwaite, does seem like a very able commander. And when we look at other battles the 62nd takes part in, like Cambrai, later in 1917, is a very successful commander. All right. So as one artillery officer in the 62nd Division says, referring to the Germans, the savages are now contesting every inch of ground with desperation, but Tommy's more than a match for Fritz. A long consultation with General Brathwaite this evening. I think we have considered every eventuality, every possible move on the chessboard. They have been fighting on, or they've been on holding the line in front of Bullecourt for 3 weeks. They've really been in the area for 4 weeks, so not the 4 months. They don't trust their allies on either side of them, the Australians, and they're facing a very good division, the 27th Winterberg Division. It was considered by British intelligence to be one of the best divisions that the German forces had. There was very weak coordination between the corps leadership and divisional commanders, not a lot of talking. They'd be advancing about 2,400 meters, so just over 2 kilometers to the town of Bullecourt. We saw where it had been shelled out in the previous slide. This is a picture that shows where the 62nd lines were, where they started, to where they were going. By this time, there would be no sort of surprise at all. The Battle of Arras had been going on for 3 weeks. There had already been an attempt on this line. So yeah, everyone was ready for an attack coming. All right, so the attack goes in, and it's an absolute failure. All the brigades, 185, 186, 187 of the 62nd Division, failed to make it past the first line of German defenses. Heavy German shelling from the surrounding hills absolutely hammers advancing forces. There's a loss of communication both between the different brigades attacking, but also between the divisions attacking, as well as between junior officers in different companies. Within the first hour, over 116 officers and 2,800 other ranks of the 62nd have suffered casualties. At this point, within the first hour, the advancing soldiers of the 62nd stop advancing. Now, after battle reports, interviews with these soldiers in the immediate aftermath is, all of our junior officers were killed. We had no idea what our objectives were. We didn't see attack going on the other side. So we just hunkered down and tried to pull back. So this idea of knowing what they were looking for or how they were going forward is not there like it was at Vimy Ridge. All right. As an after report says, the difficulties of this attack were beyond the capacity of the platoon commanders to control, though many showed great individual gallantry. The individual soldier, left largely to his own initiative, apparently lost all power to exercise it. There was poor communications at all levels, from army to corps to divisional. There was an overconfidence by the senior leadership. There was an artillery failure to absolutely try to take out some of the defenses, and doctrinal interpretation of these training manuals was different between divisions at this time. Because they weren't within one solid corps, like the Canadian Corps, where all 4 divisions trained and understood these manuals the same way, there would be different ways divisional commanders read these booklets. Basically, in a British Corps, division would just be flown in, or I guess not flown, but shopped in for an engagement and then pulled out again. So when they're doing all their training beforehand, they're not necessarily doing it within that same corps. All right. So the attack did carry on for another 13 days. The total casualties for the 62nd Division was over 4,000. And as one individual wrote, For the sheer horror of war, Bullecourt cannot be surpassed. Never saw a battlefield, including Ypres in 1917, where the living and the unburied dead remained so close for so long. All right, so before I end this, I looked throughout the book, but also in this battle, at 7 comparable variables where we could compare how did it differ between a British division and a Canadian division. Results. Results are pretty clear cut here. The Canadians' 4th Division did achieve its goals, though it did take a couple days longer than other Canadian divisions. It got its objectives that it was set out to do. The 62nd Division absolutely did not. All right, why was that? And then we go down to these other variables. Preparation time. The 62nd Division was thrown into this battle, whereas the Canadians had 4 months to prepare for it. So Canadian 4th Division did have a leg up there. Artillery support. The British guns of the 62nd Division were adding layers on in the 3 weeks that they were there, but they had not been in place for the same amount of time as the Canadian guns. Soldiers' knowledge. They trained the same way with the same training manuals, but the knowledge itself of what they were attacking, where they're attacking, what their objectives were, it was not there. It was not to the same level as the Canadians. Leadership of Brathwaite and Watson seems relatively comparable at this time. I didn't have enough time to go into the details there. At the Corps and Army level, though, it was a lot different, where there was a lot less oversight within the British 62nd Division by their Corps and Army commanders. There was almost zero oversight. German forces, the German forces were comparable. The one thing that could happen at Bullecourt that would not happen at Vimy Ridge is that the Germans could always keep on sending in reinforcements, where because of the ridge and how it worked, it would be a lot more tricky. So I think I've used up my allotted time here. So I know I rushed through that. So I hope you guys have lots of questions. And I just want to thank you again for coming into this. And I will, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Okay, folks, so I would just remind you that there is the raise hand function. And if Dr. Jackson takes his slides down, then we'll be, or are you able to see them, Dr. Jackson? There you go.
I took the slides down. I got the raise hand function.
Oh, good. So if you can, folks, just raise your hands. And Dr. Jackson will see you hopefully. And if you somehow can't figure that out, you can always holler. I'm raising my hand and he'll at least be able to hear that. So
Tim, I see you up as the first one.
Tim, you have to unmute. Or our coordinator has to unmute you. In fact, I would unmute across the board, Tom, if you can hear me. Unmute them all, and then they can mute themselves if they want to be muted. We'll try that. Otherwise, Tim is never going to get to ask a question.
Does someone else? Oh, sorry.
There we go. Okay, so hopefully. Yes, he's out muted people now. So that should help Tim, hopefully. Tim. Okay. So small blip in the force. So Dr. Jackson asks if there's someone else who's got a hand up. And then
I don't see anyone else's question raised or a hand raised right now. So if someone else has a question, please let me know and we can get back to Tim. Yeah, Sean?
I found this very interesting. I appreciate your lecture. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you great. Thank you very much.
It's obviously interesting for its own sake, but I'd be curious, is there any conclusions or lessons that you would generalize from that would be relevant, that we could bear in mind for current practice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's one that I've thought about. I've also done some work with NATO and working in this international environment. And one of the things that I think is incredibly important is that when you're working with different forces, is to be very clear on the expectations and to be very clear on how you're going to be operating and how and what the expectations are with each other. And it's one of the things that's going to carry on throughout throughout the First World War, is that with the Canadians, one of their great strengths is that they're always trained together and they're always together, so that that sort of trust with each other is there. Whereas the British 62nd Division is thrown all over the place, and often just sort of piecemeal 2 weeks into a division with another division next to it that has no relationship with. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, everybody. I'm still getting used to Zoom. I'm going to have to, if you want to ask a question, you'll have to unmute yourselves. Unfortunately, I can't unmute you. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, but then unmute yourselves. Okay, thanks.
Patrick?
Geoffrey, hello. I'm Patrick from Kitchener-Waterloo. I'm sorry I didn't read your book. I will now.
You don't have to, but thank you. It's very gracious.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused. I'm sure you can help me out here. You mentioned that the 4th Division had over 3,500 casualties in 3 days at Vimy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just told us that 62nd Division had 4,200 plus in 13 days at Bullecourt. I'm getting more the reasons for the additional casualties, but what doesn't strike me as being obvious is the dissimilarity between the two divisions in terms of casualties alone. Clearly, the Australians didn't support the 62nd, and the Canadians, as you mentioned, were always operating together, which is totally foreign to the way the British employed their divisions. I was wondering if you could just expand on that a little bit further to help me understand better
why the 62nd had 700 more casualties.
Well, that and anything else you think is useful to add about the dissimilarities between either their training or I mean, I know that at that time, for example, the British also had lots of conscripts in the ranks, which the Canadians did not yet have. So I was wondering whether or not you thought that had anything to do with you know, the results of the battle, or anything else you might.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful question. So first off the bat, with just the 700, largely both attacks suffer the same amount of casualties. Just that the 62nd is not pulled out for 13 days, so they don't launch any more attacks, but just being on that front line there and just being hammered by counterattacks and stuff is just going to add up to the extra casualties that they suffer. So getting into the main part of your question and the main drive of it, and it's the fascinating thing about my research that I really like is just why are these divisions different? Now, conscripts, and they do come for the 62nd, at this point, they're not there yet. They're largely raw volunteers from Middle England that have been just sort of hanging around here for 2 years that have now been put on the Western Front. However, they're not the brightest and the best, because all of those have been taken away, and these units have been refilled. Now, in 1918, if we're jumping a year ahead of the story, Canadian division will grow from about 20,000 to 22, 23,000, whereas a British division will actually shrink to about 16,000. So when we see a British division compared to a Canadian division, say in the last 100 days, a Canadian division is way bigger and has way more firepower than a British division. Also, by this time, the British can't reinforce their divisions as well anymore. Though there are conscripts and a lot of them coming into the 62nd, they're also, the 62nd in July will have lost so much men from wastage and what have you. They're actually getting battalions just coming up from the Middle East that are filling into their ranks. So units that have not even fought on the Western Front are thrown in for the 60-second fight at the Second Battle of the Marne and stuff like that. For this Vimy Ridge, if we go back to 1917 or the Battle of Arras, yeah, the problem is, though they are training, when you look at all the war diaries, you go through all their trainings, they're using the same material, but they don't have the same amount of time to use it or train with it once they're on the Western Front. Where the Canadians leading up to Vimy have months to prepare for this. The 62nd doesn't get there to February, then they're moved all around the place, and they're doing a lot of time, like all divisions had to do, building roads, rebuilding trenches. They're not spending any time training. And then a couple of weeks before Bullecourt, they said they're going in there, and then that's it. I think that's one of the big issues in this Battle of Arras is they're given no prep time, and what they're attacking keeps on changing. And their corps commander, Fanichet, is not communicating with the 62nd leadership at all. There's no looking at people's individuals. I go through individual diaries as well as looking at the official war diaries and other things. There seems to be no relationship there. Whereas Watson, you can read his diaries or you go through the war diaries. Bing is coming around and talking to them. Bing is holding these big training scenarios here to make sure everyone's on the same page. That's not happening.
Yeah, if I could have a quick follow-up then, in comparison to the two, obviously the 4th Division had a huge challenge at the Pimple.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you comment on how did they ever get picked. You wonder why the divisions were lined up 1, 2, 3, 4 going to the left. It's sort of like through Arabic script instead of what we do and count from the left. So it would logically put 1st Division, Curry's old division, against the Pimple, and of course that's counterfactual, but something we could discuss over a glass sometime. But I was wondering if you might comment a little more, if you would, on the opposition, the Op 4 at Bullecourt compared to what 4th Division faced at the Pimple.
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the real highlights for me and luxuries I had when I'm writing this, because this is actually the books from my PhD dissertation, is that one of my supervisor was Dr. Holger Herwig. And so I had a German expert there who I could hammer with questions. And he actually carried out research for me on what the Germans were doing fighting these divisions, because I can't read German. So I'm going to be taking from him and what he said. He said that both divisions that these, so both what the Canadians faced and what the 62nd faced were good German divisions. So we can't say the Germans viewed them as good divisions, the British intelligence viewed them as good decisions. So it wasn't that one was weaker than the other. One of the things though that Dr. Herwig brought to my attention was that the Germans weren't going to reinforce in any meaningful manner Vimy Ridge. They already had this other line behind there, the Aubry-Maricourt line, that was part of the Hindenburg line, that was more heavily defended. Whereas at Bullecourt, if you got through at Bullecourt, it could open up more strategic avenues if you got through the Hindenburg line, which, to be fair, looking back 105 years later, it doesn't seem very realistic. And the Germans were piling in more reinforcements, and it was on a rail line. So I think that German defenses, though divisions would be similar, there was more reasons why Germany was going to fight for Bullecourt.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, hopefully I answered. If not, fire me off an email, and I'm sorry for rushing through all this.
Right.
Angus, I see your hand up as the next one.
Yes, my question is fairly basic. You've highlighted a lot of differences between the two divisions, the 4th Canadian Division and the British 62nd Division. For the purposes of your comparative comparison that you were doing, I would be curious to know why you picked the 62nd Division out of all the British divisions, of all the battles that they fought, and also the Battle of Bullecourt.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's one when I started this project. The Canadian 4th was was an easy one to pick. One, it hadn't been studied within Canada in any real detail, where we had a lot on the first division. We had PhD dissertations already on the second division. I wanted to do a comparison. I wanted to look at only 2 years of the war, because otherwise it would just become too big a project. And I wanted to look at one that was very volunteer force like the Canadians, with a small cadre of officers or professional soldiers. So if I had that set up for the Canadian 4th Division, when they entered the Western Front, which is actually at the tail end, it's in August, but they see first fighting at the tail end of the Somme, not as part of Canada. They actually fight within a British Corps and then move into the Canadian Corps after that. I wanted a British division that entered around the same time, was made up of a similar cadre of people before they left for the Western Front, and that showed, or that fought in similar amounts of battles in 1917 and 1918. So we had lots of those metrics as close as possible. Now, there wasn't an ideal fit. There wasn't like the perfect match, but the 62nd came closest to it. And so that's why I picked the 62nd Division.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I do not see any other hands raised.
Okay, Sean.
Sean, yes.
You spoke of the advantage that the Canadians had compared with the 62nd, because the Canadians were accustomed to working closely together and familiar with one another and so forth. But as I understand it, Vimy Ridge was the first time that the Canadian Corps deployed and operated as a corps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true. However, the Canadian Corps came together. The Canadian Corps came way together before this, but the Canadian 4th Division entered the Canadian Corps in November of 1916, and they would stay together as a unit from 1916 till November of 1918, always fighting together with those 4 divisions. So though it was the first battle that they had together, they had 6 months together where they could train together, where they would have same core leadership, and where ideas would be disseminated between all 4 divisions. Whereas the 62nd Division, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe it is in 13 different corps during its time on the Western Front. And it doesn't get to the Western Front and put into a corps till February of 1917. And it's moved to a different corps to fight in this battle 5 weeks later.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Bill?
Thank you. Well, there's very interesting stuff. When you're looking at 4th Division, did you have a look at the sort of 1, 2, and 3 as well while you're at it, to see if there was a common sort of quality to be attached to Canadian divisions?
Yes, I absolutely did. One of the metrics, and I didn't have time to get into it with this conversation, just because I was trying to be brief, was one of the things is looking at the relationships it has with different divisions within its core. So I looked at how it interacted. Did it actually interact well or not well? And does it really matter? And where it really sort of matters for the Canadians in the last 100 days, because they do really hard, heavy fighting, and they have those same divisions beside them at the same time. And then equally, I looked at the British 62nd, what divisions were on either side of it. And something like Bullecourt, just the lack of communication, the lack of being able to work together really fell apart. And like, for catastrophic reasons, there was no working relationship. And the 62nd actually refused to talk to the Australians after the first Battle of Bullecourt, which isn't a great idea if they're going in again 3 weeks later for the second Battle of Bullecourt. So yeah, and then you look at other metrics, you look at, are they training differently than their divisions within the Corps? And there was really no different training between different Canadian divisions, nor between British divisions within British corps. They all have the same training syllabus.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, if there are no more questions, then it falls to me first off. And I have several things I.
Sorry,
Oh,
Louise.
No.
Jean had his hand up, but
Okay,
now it's down.
Jean Mora.
Sorry, I meant to raise that.
okay, then I'll be quiet.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to take a stab at the question of having the 4th Division on the left side.
Okay.
It was the youngest division, yes, and probably the least experienced.
Yeah.
But I, from what I remember, I think that the way that they envisaged the battle, the main threat would not be on the left side, but it would be on the right side. Because the 1st Division and the 2nd Division were exposed to a long progress on very open ground, where they were exposed to artillery and they were exposed to machine gun fire. And the British had provided the 5th Division, the 5th British Division, as an attachment to the Canadian Corps. And that 5th Division was attached to the 2nd Division because it was expected at that time that that's where it would be needed. The distance to be crossed by the 4th Division was much shorter. It was, of course, uphill, but they were not so exposed to the artillery as they were, progressing along the steep slope that was on the reverse of the heights, and they were not exposed to artillery so directly as other divisions were. There was a great error that was done by 4th Division right on H hour, is that one of the unit commander decided that he did not want the position in front of him to be annihilated by his artillery, because he intended to grab that position and use it in his advance. And that turned out to be an extremely wrong decision, because that enemy position destroyed not only his unit, but weakened his brigade considerably. 2 units that had been put on the left side of the 4th Division so that they would neutralize the pimple had to be withdrawn from there and brought back to the main position of the division to replace those losses that occurred in the very first hour of the progress. And it ruined really the plan for going uphill on that side. My question is, were they thinking, in fact, that the mission of the 4th Division would be easier for them, that it would be on the right side, and gave it to the younger division at that time, or the least experienced division, because they thought, in fact, that it would be easier? Another factor is that the right flank of the Corps was occupied by a division that I think General Turry did not trust very much. They were not sure that their flank would be well covered on that long progress of the 1st Division. So I think that there is probably ground to look into to see if the thought before the battle was that the left flank would be the most difficult or the right flank would be the most difficult. And I think that they thought that the right flank would be more difficult, and that's why Kirby was there.
Yeah, you may be right. You're absolutely right with the 4th Division and Odlum's mess up with the 11th Brigade and the 85th Battalion not being out there. That said, there is nothing written down in any of the notes that I've been able to read, writings of Curry or any of the documents outright saying that. And as we saw, or as you well know, during the battle, the 4th Division struggles because of Odlum, but also because of enfilade machine gun fire and other defensive positions that the 4th Division can't get at. So your theory absolutely holds a lot of weight and makes sense to me. That said, it's still, we still don't have an absolute answer for it. And it still leaves me a bit questioning when you look at the terrain and walk it to see the differences there, and how the Pimple and Hill 145 are that much more challenging to take. Patrick, I see that your hand's up.
Yeah, sorry for coming back. I just had a quick question. Do you know when the soft cover version of your book on General Watson is coming out?
Yeah, I don't, because the hardcover version, $65, is way too expensive. I don't know if they're, yeah, I don't know. Wilfrid Laurier hasn't let me know anything. They've been great. The publisher, like, they're fantastic, but they have not let me know anything about what's going on with it. But yeah, I'd highly recommend it. It's great.
But I'd like to interject here because he's not liable to tell you, but he did do a great lecture series with Guelph University, and it is online on YouTube on his book, Diaries of, on the War of Diaries of David Watson. So there's an hour-long presentation that he's done at Guelph University that is available online today. And it's a great hour well spent. So I would encourage you, just type his name in and look up videos, and it'll appear just as nice as can be. So just
Thank you very much.
until such time as there's a soft cover, there is a great presentation out there.
Thank you.
No more questions? So if there's no more questions, I will add, we are recording this event this evening, and we will figure out where we're going to put it. And you'll be able to find out for sure what we've done with it on our Friends of the Canadian War Museum Facebook site, which is open to anyone. I will also thank you, those of you who have made donations based on this presentation this evening. Assure you that your money is being well spent. We are supporting a research position within the museum. We are supporting, again, the great history boxes that go out to the schools for both the First and the Second World War. So, you know, I assure you that we are not broke by any such stretch of the imagination, and we are still making very large donations to the museum on your behalf. I will also highlight for you that we do have you can access presentations in the past that have been done by the Friends, again, by simply going to the Friends of the Canadian War Museum Facebook site and see what's there. And I would encourage you to encourage others who may not be Friends. They're more than welcome to sign up for these presentations going forward. We're not exclusive to the Friends. We let anybody in if they want to join and they want to experience some of these presentations. So it is my task to say thank you to Dr. Jackson on your behalf. As you know, there's lots of interest in the Friends in the First World War. We've been very fortunate and blessed to have presentations from others like Tim Cook as well. And even I have a grandfather who served in the First World War. And so obviously there's many of us that have a great interest in this particular field. So we were very fortunate to nab Dr. Jackson this evening. On your behalf, the Friends will be giving him a small gift certificate that he can use to go to our lovely bookstore. And Julia has offered to help him find any treasures that he might be missing in his collection. So I assure you that we are doing that on your behalf. And just so in principle, Dr. Jackson, thank you very much. Finally, before you all disappear, we will have another presentation in May by Dr. Tyler Wenzel on the Mackenzie Papineau Battalion. Scott Healy, you're there. I'm not sure the date of that. I'm not sure what date was this negotiated with him, but I do know that it will be in May. And of course, it'll be announced in the newsletter, et cetera, for you folks. So, and again, I encourage you, if you know other people that are particularly interested in these topics, please feel free to pass on the information because we're, an equal opportunity planner here. So these next two will both, this one and the next one will be virtual as well. Then we may have one more presentation virtually, then a small pause, and then we hope to be back in the museum by September. And we're starting to plan another program there. I noticed Heather's online there this evening. And if you'll all have a look, you'll see Heather has her bird right beside her. I can see a parrot in the picture right now, which is kind of cute. And Heather is part of the events committee. And she's working diligently to kind of come up with some interesting topics for you in the future. So anyway, that's, I think, just about covers it. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add? since you're, Scott Healy, since you're sitting there?
Oh, thanks, Louise. No, that was wonderful, Dr. Jackson. Very informative discussion, and I think the questions were very probing to sort of test your knowledge and depth on this. And as Louise said, we're going to experiment and keeps experimenting to expand the Friends outreach across the country. And certainly both in person and virtual will continue to be part of our repertoire for the future. So again, thank you, Louise, for moderating today, and Dr. Jackson for your time, and for everyone who attended, thank you again very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.